Hello, my name is Joel Bennett, and I'd like to welcome you to The Power of Five, a series that brings together 5 behavioral change experts from around the world on topics related to leadership. Our intention today is that by sharing our thoughts and perspectives, we'll give you something new to think about and encourage you to find ways to apply it through actionable steps that allow you to improve your own leadership and team culture. So here's the question for today's panel. I've seen dozens of lists on LinkedIn and elsewhere espousing all the top habits of great leaders. If you were making your own list, what would be your top 1 or 2? Todd, you want to start us?
Sure. I'm with you on these lists, eh? Like I think I read them everywhere. Like Forbes has got them, and LinkedIn's got them, and everyone's got these lists as to this is what it takes to make a great leader. And I think it's probably important to note that there probably isn't a list. Like there probably isn't a, hey, if you can tick off the following things, you're a good leader. And if you can't tick off the following things, you're a bad leader. I think that's really important for us to just embrace, and all leaders to embrace, because it takes the pressure off of, oh God, now here are all the things I've got to work on. But since you asked the question, I would say at the top of the list for me, courage is probably up there. And courage is, being able to step into, hey, I made a mistake, or hey, I don't have the answer, or hey, I need help, or hey, like those things that we feel we can't say and do as leaders. That's the area I think to step into. And I think that's what makes great leaders, is being able to lean into that and have the courage to step away from it. And if I had to put a number 2 on there, Joel, I think what I would add is intention. I think leadership, is either going to happen intentionally or unintentionally. And, when we let it happen unintentionally, we're constantly apologizing for our actions or trying to redo. But if we actually put some mindfulness and intention into it and say, hey, here are the things that, I want to say this, I want to have this relationship, I want to make this decision, I want to ask this question, and do it with reason and purpose and intention, I think that adds to people's leadership. So those are my 2, courage, intention. Forbes, hope you're listening, put them on your list. This is what it is.
So what would the rest of the group add?
I'll add in a couple thoughts here. They're related, and the first one would be a non-negotiable commitment to personal well-being, and to a non-negotiable commitment to fully unplug on a regular basis. Maybe it's daily, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's every once in a while, but to fully unplug and focus on your well-being. So to the point that Todd just raised, we all know how effective we are in behaving the ways we want to behave when we actually take care of our own system, when we get the rest we need, the nutrition we need, the love we need, the joy we need, the community that we need, the solitude that we need. We can actually do some of these things better. So for me, the number 1 thing would be a non-negotiable commitment to personal well-being and all of those aspects. And the second, and related to that, would be a non-negotiable commitment to not being in meetings all the time. A non-negotiable commitment to being with your people for simple downtime, for giving yourself some white space to think, to strategically think about your business. That's your job as the leader, for reflection, and then for your own personal growth and development, right? So just to ensure that you get that space, even within the business, to zoom out a little bit. First of all, spend some of that one-on-one time with your folks, and then second of all, really enable yourself that space for clear thinking, for strategic thinking, The leaders that I talk to now are running around working 24/7. They're plugged into everything all the time. And I just don't think that they get that space right now.
Catherine, I think that's interesting because as Todd mentioned about intentionality, I think a big part of what you're talking about is being intentional with your time, right? And creating time, not just for yourself, but for others. I mean, from what you do and working with leaders, are there ways that you're seeing them do that well? Or are there habits that they've created around that make sure that those times and those spaces are held fast?
Well, I mean, this is the thing about intentionality. Everything is connected, right? So the ones who are doing it well, either through a catalyzing event where they kind of had to, or some sort of light bulb where they actually sit down and they invest the planning for personal well-being and for, the well-being of the people in their organizations. They book it right into their calendar and they're steadfast about that commitment. As I mentioned, it has to be a steadfast, non-negotiable, and ultimately they walk the talk and encourage and create a culture where other people in that organization or even just on that team also take that time, right? So that when they do come together, they're a more productive, more efficient, more creative unit of people that can actually get better results. I say this stuff almost every time, right? Focusing on the well-being and then focusing on the connection of others and their well-being. I just think is such a fundamental thing that's critical to leadership.
Yeah. Mandy, what do you think?
Well, it's hard. It's always hard going third or fourth because you sort of go, after you'd spoken, Todd, it was like, you pitched mine and then Catherine pitched mine. So, but I would build on what Catherine had said and yourself, Todd, is that I would use the reflective thinking, but reflective with the intention of learning. I think the most powerful way, and everything that I've read, is the more senior you become, the most powerful way to learn is to think reflectively around what I did, what triggered me to do it, what was the impact I had, and then rather than finger of blame, what could I have done differently? To pick up on what Catherine's point was, that leaders don't make that time, not consciously every day. One of the things that all five of us do is using the habit building platform. And I'm really excited to see that is starting to create discipline and rigor with people that I work with, and you can hear them saying, wow, it's actually quite good to have this reminder every day to make me think about my day and what I want to take away from my day and what I want to do differently tomorrow. So to me, that is the most powerful thing as a leader, is to keep learning. And that takes courage, because when you want to go and look in that mirror, sometimes it's so much easier and nicer to blame other people for what's happened than take responsibility myself. The other thing, which also sort of picks up on basically what Todd and Catherine was saying, but brings a slightly different slant, is being completely present with people. Stop having your phone on, but also not just being in your head, actually watching what people are doing, the impact they're creating. And that's one of the reasons that I see most leaders are unable to give feedback, because they can't give feedback because they haven't got evidence, because they're not watching and they're not observing, they're not being present with their people, really present, not just in their own head, say what they want to say and get the messages across that they want to get across, but actually watching. And I think that takes intention. And as Catherine was saying, it means that I have to bring a level of energy and presence of myself so that I can actually be present with others. And I think that's critical.
I'm going to date myself here. One of the very first business books I read when I was a young buck many, many years ago, I think the book is now at least 25 years old, was In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters. And the concept that really stuck with me then and still does now was management by walking around. So management by walking around actually incorporates a number of the points that everybody's made. Is management by walking around is actually talking to your team. It's actually listening, and deeply listening is really important. Not just listening to do lip service, but really, really listening. And then empathy, like show that you care. So I go back to that Tom Peters management by walking around, because if you just do that one thing with a little bit of heart, it's going to solve a lot of issues. The other quick thing that I would add is having a clear vision and clearly communicating that with everybody else. You know, maybe I'm gonna lose a lot of business because consultants get brought in when there's problems. And for me, 8 of the 10 problems was the vision wasn't clearly communicated and people didn't know what direction they were going. So that would be the other one that I would add to the list.
So because I know if there's any of my clients watching this, they'll go, Mandy, you always say that whole managing by wandering around is a load of rubbish. And there's an element of, and so what I would love to explore, Shawn, is how you described it, I think is a little different in that you want to have intentional connection. Because what I worry about the managing by wandering around is often leaders only do it when they're exhausted, when they have come off something that's had them in Q1, crisis mode. So they go into what I call trivia mode and they just go wandering around. But there's not an intention around it. So it's sort of then becoming an interruption to other people. So what I say to people is, I think the concept of managing by wandering around is valid, but it needs to be intentional Q2 time, not just you wandering around interrupting people, idle chit chat that actually doesn't have depth and meaning.
100%.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I have a client that's in the paving business. So he owns a paving company. And, you know, when I ask him what's the key to success, he's owned this company for 27 years. And he talks about, I go out on the cruise once a month and work on the paving crews once a month. He said, honestly, he gets home and he's so sore and they tease him. But he said that's the one thing he's committed to, and that would be his #1 leadership lesson, because then they know you're with them. And I totally agree. It's not something like, you know, one of my pet peeves of leaders is they read an article and they're like, oh, I'm going to do that. Well, you can't just do it. You got to actually care and do it with intention. So I totally agree with you.
Sure. Isn't that what this conversation is all about? Is you read a list and you go, okay, I got to go do that, but not actually critically thinking about, is it important? Like I read a book and it says management by wandering around. Okay, I'm going to wander around, but you know, you're bumping into walls and you're hitting plants over and stuff like that. Like have some intent. It actually should be managing by creating connections, right? Or managing by, you know, building relationships, right? But not just wandering around. And couldn't agree more with you, Mandy.
Right, just you've been referring to Q1 time and Q2 time. I don't know what you're referring to.
So thank you. And I should have clarified that. So in Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I think it actually originally came from the US Navy. It's just a really simple little matrix that says, where am I spending my time and my energy and how effective is it? So Q1 is everything is really important.
Oh, it's really urgent and important.
Urgent and important. So one of the scales. And Q2 is it's important, but it's not urgent. So because it's not urgent, we don't invest time. And the Covey Institute did research and said that as an effective leader, we should be spending about 70% of our time in Q2. That the surveys they did, so the Q2 is it's important, but it's not urgent. The surveys they did was that 70 to 80% of leaders' time is spent in Q1, which is urgent and important, and Q3, which is it's not important to me, but it's urgent to others. And it's called interruptions. And my fear is that when we do the wandering around, what we're doing is interrupting people with stuff that's not important to them at that point in time, because it hasn't been given relevance. So that Q1 and Q3 is the challenge for most leaders and most team members to get out of.
I think, Mandy, the differentiator for me between what you're talking about and what Shawn was throwing out there, there's a lean concept or a continuous improvement concept called Gemba, which is a Japanese word, but it essentially means go out to where the problem is or where the people are. And the point of it is just understanding what's actually going on instead of, you know, as folks that I used to work with would say, you know, sitting in the ivory tower behind your desk, guessing about what's going on or guessing what people are doing or how they're developing themselves. And so Gemba is really about, let's go walk the problem. Let's be amongst the people, understand what's going on, and then provide the leadership they need to keep things moving.
Probably a lot of leaders could just benefit from Q tips, right? Clear your ears, listen, right? Be in that area.
Just care, like empathy. I mean, I think we can wordsmith things, but if you care and deeply listen, that's 90% of it.
So the thing I would add to the list is this whole thought process around a lot of the concepts we're talking about are trust, right? And so just trusting your people. But I would go a little bit further than that in saying we go out and we try to hire the best people possible, really smart people, really good people. What we need to do as leaders is bring them in the organization, give them what they need, and then get out of the way, right? So Steve Jobs had said it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do, right? And so for me, if you're going to go out and hire the best people, first, when I work with organizations, is know what you need and then hire to that standard. Quit getting desperate and bringing in people that don't necessarily meet your needs. Get the right people, get the people that are going to be able to solve the problems. Give them what they need, the resources, the time, the authority, if necessary, to do the things they need to get done. And then as a leader, get out of their way, right? There's no reason to micromanage. There's no reason to second guess. If they are as smart as you think they are, and they're as skilled as you think they are, let them work, right? Be supportive, provide them what they need if they come to you. But that's the reason why we're hiring somebody to step into that role. If you wanted to do the role, you should have filled the opening with yourself. So I think that's a big trust issue for a lot of leaders is they don't necessarily trust their people. And that's why, you know, to your point, Mandy, the walking around is more about checking on everybody else instead of checking in with everybody.
I mean, I always have a love-hate relationship with the reality show called Undercover Boss. But I watch it to see what happens because I find it quite sad that a boss has to go undercover to actually find out what's happening in their business because they are that removed and there is that level of fear and power and all the different things. So I think there's a lot to learn from that, is that being with people, engaging with people, as opposed to wandering around checking in on them. Yeah.
Right. So I just want to recap what we've learned. You know, we talked about courage and being courageous and stepping into the leadership role and being intentional. I think that came out in a number of different points that were made. You know what you're doing, know where you're going, be very clear with that with other people, and then be intentional with your time, with the contact you would make with people, the way you develop others. You know, Catherine brought up the points of taking care of yourself. You know, this we've talked about this multiple times, especially during this era of COVID. You know, you need to be able to take care of yourself so that you're equipped to be able to take care of others. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you know, that's just not sustainable in leadership. And so being able to manage your time, block out space to kind of recharge your own batteries is big. Being strategic was another piece of this that I found interesting. You know, thinking about what the team needs, being more proactive than reactive. As Todd would say, hand out more Q-tips and listen, right? Actually listen to what people are saying, not for you're listening for what you're going to respond, but what you listening for understanding, right? Making sure that you realize where people are coming from and how you can assist. So I appreciate the conversation today. And very much appreciate my co-hosts, Catherine and Mandy and Shawn and Todd, for what they do in the change management space. We hope that you've been able to pull something from today's discussion that you can take action on to be able to create a plan around and start practicing on a regular basis. And so with that, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I hope you will join us for episode 3 of season 2 of The Power of 5 coming up soon. See you then.
See you guys.
Yeah.